I mean, one of the narratives of Stalin that he was always this gangster and he just kind of looked for opportunities to do terrible things. But I don't think that is borne out by the evidence.
Stalin. The very name means man of steel. And much like steel, he was a cold, powerful man.
He was a revolutionary. He was a follower of Lenin.
He may have had a paltry sum of good intentions for Russia, but what can't be forgotten is the truth behind the immensely evil and authoritative dictator. Stalin was born on December 18, 1878, in Gori, Georgia, a country that would soon be annexed by the very same man into their great neighbor to the north. To most accounts, he wasn't a caring person, more a man of priorities. Later in life, as the church pushed him away, Stalin grew fond of the communist movement happening in Russia. He was largely attracted to figures of authority, which first led him towards religion, then the Bolsheviks. The Bolsheviks were revolutionaries banded together to overthrow the provisional government and create a government for the proletariat. Stalin's role with the Bolsheviks was a large contribution to their success.
And he wanted to be more, he was a hidden leader of the revolution, but he wasn't known by the people.
He mainly robbed banks and took over government buildings, but then was later appointed by Lenin to serve on the Central Committee of the Bolshevik Party shortly after Lenin's exile to Switzerland. He became very close to Lenin before Lenin's passing to try and sneak his way past the competitors into power.
At the time when Lenin dies, the Civil War is over. You have this consolidating Soviet Union.
His main competition for leader of the Soviet Union was Leon Trotsky, a more socialist-minded leader who believed in more widespread socialist values across nations. Stalin, on the other hand, was a very Russia-first-minded man. When Lenin passed on January 21, 1924, strategic networking made by Stalin among top leaders in the Bolshevik Party provided Stalin's way to power and guaranteed his position in the Soviet Union.
And the reason he was elected as the chairman of the Communist Party is because he was the bureaucrat, the head of the people. He's the one that the people in the Communist Party worked with. And so they owed their position and place in the Communist Party to Stalin and not to Trotsky.
The next 24 or so years would change Russia more than it has ever been changed before. The more time he spent in command, the more radical and nationalistic his actions became.
You have to understand that more than anything else, Stalin was a megalomaniac nationalist.
Everything that he did was to secure his regime he had set up. Everything from 5-year plans to the Great Purges was because of his paranoia of the communist dream not living on. This caused widespread famine among peasants and a large amount of death. His idea was to essentially starve the peasants to death to keep better control on his reign. His beliefs led him to regarding peasants as saboteurs with the intent of taking down the Soviet Union. If they didn't die from starvation, they would be deported to gulags.
You have a largely agrarian society, and that's not a good basis, right, for building a communist state. You need those people to be industrial workers and live in cities. So what do? You have to take steps, right? So you try to turn the farms into factories, right? You try to industrialize farms, and you want to move these people away from being peasants to being workers. And anybody who couldn't or wouldn't conform to that vision of the future had to die.
A large example of peasant starvation was the famine in Ukraine. Ukrainians were so badly stuck in poverty that they began resorting to cannibalism to keep themselves alive.
There's plenty of evidence, Timothy Snyder and others, the point that he intentionally starved the Ukrainians during the Great Famine just to get rid of them, because they were problematic.
During the Great Purges, or also commonly known as the Great Terror, Stalin had millions of people arrested on unfounded charges, forced them to admit, and then executed or sent them to labor camps that had unlivable conditions, ending their chance of any survival.
Вот почему товарищ Сталин 1000 раз прав, когда он нам говорит: не обюрокративайтесь, не думайте, что вы установники такие, знаете ли, маститые, что вы такими родились, вы тоже были молокососы. Да вот теперь годится лицами стать. Извольте выдвигать, смелее, учите людей. Конечно, выдвигать это не значит по головке гладить. Я вот хотел...
He used this terror as an effective way to keep loyalty in the Soviet Union ingrained in people's minds. Another way Stalin eased his paranoia of losing loyalty from the people was to create propaganda that made communism, his Red Army, and himself look like gods. Images of religious figures were often taken down off of home walls and were replaced with images of Stalin himself.
Вот теперь скоро уже 2 года, как мы переживаем темень и осень фашистского нашествия. Как будто близится утро победы, но пока все еще ночь.
More propaganda arose when World War II began. Stalin had many advertisements for the Red Army released. During the German occupation of Lithuania, he released a radio broadcast where he instills pride for the Red Army into the people, referring to it as the glorious Red Army, and convinces them Russia will come out on top.
He moved Russia from a 70% agricultural country to the 3rd largest industrial country in the world before World War II started.
He calls his people brothers and sisters to make them feel like he is equal to them and convince them he cares. Following World War II, he further demonstrates his hunger for power by engaging in the Cold War with the United States, which would outlive himself.
At the end of the day, it's the United States and the Soviets that are left, and the Red Army is huge, and it is in all these places, and there's nobody there, there's nobody around to kick them out of it. So while they might be struggling to get their economy going again and get back to where they were on their way to, just the simple fact that they're the last man standing in that part of the world left them a great power. And so that lasts, right?
Although Stalin was responsible for the deaths of 50 million of his own people, the state of Russia after his death wasn't the worst. And the economy was much better than what it would have been under the control of the Provisional Army he helped Lenin defeat. Yet his evil still lingers in Russia today.
You have, when Stalin dies in '53, you have, again, a question of what it's going to look like going forward with the Soviet Union, but not in the same way as in '24. In '24, with Lenin dying, there's this, is this even going to last? Is this even going to work?
The Russian Federation may not be communist anymore, but the trust between other countries and itself is still broken. Ukraine is still struggling, and Russia's improvement today doesn't take back 50 million lost lives from them. He truly was the man with evil intent, whether he knew it or not.